Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'll be picking up from the last video where we looked at loading the different presets. This video, I'll try to keep as short as possible, talking about how to apply materials and textures through the variation builder. So this variation builder is going to be the very next tab after the presets, and what this does is it allows you to go into the very specific things that you're loading onto your model and be able to adjust them visually however you might want. And so actually a lot of the flexibility that you can get from this application comes from the variation builder. I would consider this more of an advanced tool, so you don't have to pay attention to this video if you're only wanting to load in the different armor slots. If you are wanting to go and try to create new armor pieces and new variations to the armor pieces to create new factions or whatever you're trying to build, this is the tool that you really need to pay attention to because this is where I get excited about all the flexibility that you can get into the engine very quickly. So let's start out with the simple idea is that it's as you go through your sliders, it's going to load the properties for each one of these models into your properties tab here. And what it's going to do is it's going to show you all of the indexed basically models that have materials applied to them underneath here. So for every head model, you have 6, which has been the standard for now. If you selected something like a hat or armor, each one has a different number of things that can be applied to the different materials, and so it kind of changes the scope of what all you can get away with. So like, for example, if I only have one material slot, then really there's only one primary thing that I can do to this hat. It has to apply to really all of that hat and still look good. So they've got this, like, for example, that means that they've got this rope baked into the texture. So if you try to change like the normal map or you try to change a specific detail, you basically have to ensure that it still looks, relatively good. So the idea here is that once we have this selected, say we want to go and modify this hat, we can go in here and select 1, which will open up all of the textures that are applied to this specific hat. And for example, if we wanted to try to change the color, or we want to load in a completely different kind of texture for this hat, say we wanted to try to make it look new, you could go up here to the diffuse texture, and down here underneath, first we have materials. So we're going to have materials in this first tab where you're applying essentially an entire material. For the scarecrow, you can search here and actually find different materials that are loaded into the system. You can also try to sort these to where it shows you what material properties they have activated on the material. So say, for example, you're trying to find an emissive material, one that glows in the dark. You can sort by all of those. If you want ones that only have normal maps applied, if they only have clipping maps applied for things like decals and logos, etc., etc. So I've tried to make that as flexible as possible, while also your main tool here is probably going to be trying to filter down. So the name of the model is going to be displayed up here at the top, and so anytime you're searching for different ones, like for example, you want to see all of the different materials that are applied to a player, you could just type player, and here are all the different materials that are getting applied to just the player. So for this one, we're going to hit Scarecrow. And then if we want to apply a material to this hat, you can just select any one of these. As long as this is open, you'll be able to select one. If you click this at any time and you haven't selected that material, it's going to give you this null exception. So all you have to do is press 1. And then if you select this, you can see that we're now applying that material and all of its properties to this hat. So finding the different hat that looks, or material that looks just right. Sometimes you can get lucky with a material and it actually just looks kind of good. Most of the time you need to modify the values underneath the material for it to really pop how you want it to. So let's use this as an example. So we've reapplied that material. Let's switch over to textures. The same thing is true here, so it's now sorting by Scarecrow, and it's also looking at the diffuse texture. You can change these at any time, but just know that when you click this, so let's say we're trying to change the diffuse texture, if you click this button here, it will actually update this and it's now selected. And so if you want to now only apply something to the diffuse, you can now load in any texture you want and it will apply it to that one slot. So you can find even human textures actually look okay here. What I would recommend is let's say like pattern maybe. So solid colors may or may not work. Different ones with the UV, you know, you might get different patterns that look really good. So if you want to make like kind of a fun hat made up of different things, you're just going to have to kind of click through here and find ones that you like. It's kind of fun. It also comes down to like the size of the texture as well with the UV. So if they've got it set up to where like the texture is kind of a larger scale texture and it doesn't repeat pattern onto the material how you want, you're kind of up to the mercy of whatever's available here in the panel. So if it looks good, it looks good. And if it doesn't, sadly, right now I haven't figured out a way to adjust the actual scale of the texture onto this. And so another one to look at is the gradient. So these gradients are actually a bunch of textures that are set up in a way that they can be applied to the model in different ways across the different areas. But what that ends up giving you is these material or these textures that basically have shifting color. They're gradients. And so because of that, sometimes if you're looking for a specific one, you can sometimes find ones that at least shift around enough to kind of give you some different feels as you go around the actual different armor piece or the different model you have loaded. And so it's kind of just hit or miss of what you find in here that actually applies how you would expect. But it can be a lot of fun. I recommend looking for things like fabric. If we go back to the diffuse here and we say like fabric, I think we've got several fabrics here that could be applied. Maybe some of these will look good. I actually kind of like this hat in general. And so maybe you want to keep something like this and you want a female character or you want a male, you're making a wizard, whatever it is that you want to make. This is our shop owner and we want to make a new mod that he sells wonky or weird things, you know. And then for another example, if you want to change like hair color, so we've just selected the beard. And so if you want to go in here to, again, we'll press 1 and you can see here that we have the different beard parts. What I would recommend most of the time for this is all you need to do is actually go to the, if we click the diffuse here and we type in beard, you can see here we have a brown one. So we have a couple of different beards to mess with here. That one's kind of cool because it adds color throughout the beard. So let's do something like this and say that's our character. So now we've created a custom texture and we've created custom materials for these guys. And so anytime I reference in the future, if you're mentioning something that you're trying to apply, most of the time, if you're trying to do something like this, and I'm going to pause the video and load into the game and see what loads in, but most of the time if you're doing something like this, if for whatever reason the color doesn't look right on this material, sometimes they're forcing different materials to have settings that I'm not entirely sure what's set because we're not working with the actual Dying Light 2 engine. So because of that, the next approach that I'm going to show is replacing the entire material and then loading those values onto that new material. So let's go ahead and pause the video. I'll go ahead and load the game. I'll throw in here saving. So we're going to go ahead and select player. That's going to be the player. We're going to make sure that this is set to Aiden. Go ahead and hit save. And then we're going to go ahead and we won't share this, but I'm going to also show again, make sure that you either do or do not have first person model toggled. In this case, I have a whole bunch of different items on here that will show up, but the head will not show up in first person. So that won't be relevant, but let's go ahead and load in and see what we got. I've mentioned this in another video, but if you load into the game and you don't immediately see your model, it's probably due to having other armor applied. So let's go ahead and load in here. Okay, and so we've just loaded in. This is how things look here, and then we load into the game, and not quite. So if we remove this hat, you can see that we do get the beard change. Looked like that brown actually showed up there for a second, but it actually changed a little bit. So we've got kind of a grayish red that got applied down to that beard. So obviously it's looking a little different from how we intended by setting that texture on there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try a different approach for setting that specific color on there. But you can see that we did end up basically with a gray hat. And so it basically unloaded the values that were on that hat originally. So the diffuse has been unloaded, but for whatever reason, it doesn't look like it's actually getting that new texture. So let's go ahead and try a different approach for setting that texture. So going from here, we are then going to try to do the second approach, which I was mentioning, which is to load in the new material altogether. So we're going to go ahead and actually apply a different material. And so let's go ahead and switch this out. So if we go back to our variation, we're going to go back to our hat here. And you can see here we've got this hat here. And we're going to go ahead and go back and let's actually save this variation first so that we can unload it and then load it back in through our variation slider. So then we can kind of save our progress as we're going here. And then this next approach is I'm basically going to completely replace this material with a different material. So essentially we can see here that the name for all these different ones is going to be Scarecrow. So we can go in here and apply a different material to this guy. So we've got kind of a new material altogether. You can try to make this look as good as possible if you want. It does take a moment for this new setting to apply. So when you get into the game. So if you can find one that looks relatively good, that's probably the better way to go and not too jarring or shocking. So let's go ahead and use, so this is our, this is actually one that's called Benchmark and it's for Hakon. Let's not use those just because I know that they've been doing something with Hakon's character in the background as a benchmark thing. I don't actually want to use those because I'm not sure if anything in the engine is done specific to that material, but let's avoid that one for now. And I think we'll go ahead and just use this one. It's going to be an armor add-on. And then we're going to go to each one of these things. Make sure you switch to texture. And basically we are going to use the name up here. So we're going to use Scarecrow. And then I believe it was the, if we click on the different one here, yeah, so it's the Scarecrow hat. So once you know the full name, you can actually add that as well. So if you then do Scarecrow hat, it will load in, I pressed the over key and that caused it to switch the focus there. So let's switch back to our Scarecrow hat. And then we're going to go down to the normal map. If we press that, it should load in the normal map. So we can set that. We can set the spec map. Doesn't have one, so then let's go to the rough map. See if it had a mask. I don't think it did. See if it had an index. I don't think it did. And then see if it had an occlusion. There we go. Okay, so we've now moved all of the textures from one material over to a different material. So we're now applying a completely different material to this object inside the game. And so when we go and we click on the different properties, we should now be able to set whatever texture that we want here. Because it's basically force overloading the entire material. So it's now going to try to apply this material to the entire object when we load in. And so that is what we want it to do if it's being stubborn with the different materials that we're trying to apply. I haven't looked long term to see what the effects of doing this for an entire armor or for an entire outfit would be. So please know that, you know, this is all kind of a new approach to doing this. So it may have some revisions in the future. Now for that beard, let's actually go back to our beard here. And I wasn't a huge fan of the one that loaded in. So let's go back here and we'll say beard. It was very, it was like stringy almost. Let's try to do this brown one and just see kind of what this gets us. So we'll go and hit save again. And let's try this new approach. So loading back up, I can see that the beard's looking better now, but the hat is just not, it doesn't have this new texture. And so my thought is that actually it may be that the texture that's in there is actually different from the one that we're seeing, or this could actually not exist. So the fastest way to test this out is to simply go back here to our hat, and let's actually change that material to something else, or not material, but let's change that texture to something else and see if it's an issue with this. So this file is called SRF fabric. I have noticed that some of these don't seem like they are actually in the code anymore. They do show, obviously they're in here because I've added them because they're from the actual game code. But for this example, I want to make sure that we are getting something that shows up properly. There's a camo, so let's actually, it's kind of funny. Let's actually just do a camo hat and just see what happens here. So let's hit save again and see if this fixes our problem. And you can see here that it did actually load in. So we do actually now have our camo hat and everything is working as expected. I'm currently getting some like rendering issues with recording the video and doing so many different things at once. I apologize if it's the frame rate's a little laggy there, but you can see there we do have the camo applied, we do have the red beard, and so it really is just that SRF texture didn't exist. So when going through and trying to set up these different things, a lot of this early on is going to be trial and error to kind of identify what works and what doesn't work. A lot of this process is still being discovered by myself. All of this was being done by hand previously, and so the tool allows you to do much faster edits, but it does not always result in successful outcomes without testing. And so just keep that in mind, be playful, try different things. Please let me know your feedback at any time. You can press that F12 button. So I've mentioned this in previous videos. I am trying to put as many tools in here as possible to allow me to better understand what you guys are experiencing. But you guys can't really just come in and tell me like, hey, this just doesn't work without explaining like what doesn't work, what steps you went through. Because I'm learning as I go too. So because of that, I have to recreate every issue that you're going to report. And so please just be aware that as you're going through, pressing F12 will at least give me a printout of a crash report. So from a previous video, this is underscore data crash reports, and then it's going to be the latest one. And basically this is going to give me a list of all of the material settings that you did. It doesn't currently show me all the texture settings that you did, and so I'm still writing all of the different ones. So even just showing a basic screenshot or showing what you're trying to apply will give me a better understanding of how to recreate the issue. You can also send me your presets. So if you have a preset that you would like to share, if you don't want to send it to me personally, you can also use the share button to save time and share this out. I wouldn't recommend doing that for one that's buggy. And so the best way to do that is just going to be save and then send me your preset. If you want to know where your presets are, if you set a custom output, then it's wherever you set a custom output to. Otherwise, it's going to be under the streaming assets, JSONs, custom, player, today's date, and then your latest file. I am going to add a button to open your presets folder in the future. That should make that a little bit easier. But still still learning as we go. Lots of things that it's always one of those things that you expect. I'm going to add a little something and it won't impact anything, and then you add it and it does. So it's just one of those things that you never know what might impact things as you go. So you try to be UX and testing is always appreciated. So what you guys are discovering, please let me know your feedback and we'll get it fixed over time. All right, thank you guys. Hope you enjoyed and stay tuned for the next video.